Nobody in the briefing room dared breathe too loud. Battle maps covered in red markers sprawled across the table. Outside the glass walls, Christmas snow fell thick as cold ash. The general slammed his palm down. "Your call sign?" The woman stood with her spine straight. No decorations on her collar, no pleading in her eyes. Just two words, spoken loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Specter Six." The sound seemed to drain from the room. An officer dropped his pen. Another muttered under his breath, "Impossible." Because there are names that Christmas never forgets. The fluorescent lights in forward operating base Sentinel buzzed like dying insects. General Marcus Thornhill stood at the head of the briefing table, his weathered face carved from stone and bad decisions. 40 years of service had taught him to trust steel and strategy, not ghost stories. The room smelled of burnt coffee and diesel fuel. 6 senior officers sat rigid in their chairs, their eyes fixed on the topographical maps displaying the Koryak Mountains, enemy positions marked in red, supply routes in blue, and one black circle, deep in hostile territory, where 23 American soldiers waited for extraction. "Gentlemen," Thornhill said, his voice like gravel under boots, "we have 72 hours before the weather closes in completely. After that, those men are dead." Colonel Brian Hartford leaned forward. "Sir, we've analyzed every approach vector. The terrain is impossible. Visibility will be 0 during the storm. And their defensive position, I know what their defensive position is, Colonel." Thornhill's jaw tightened. "I also know we're not leaving our people to freeze in those mountains." The door opened without a knock. She walked in wearing standard BDUs, no rank insignia, no unit patches. Dark hair pulled back severe and tight. Her face could have been 30 or 50. Something about the eyes made age irrelevant. She carried no briefcase, no files, just herself. The officers exchanged glances. Hartford's eyebrows raised a fraction. "General," she said, "one word. No salute." Thornhill studied her for 5 long seconds. "You're the specialist from JSOC?" "Yes, sir." "We don't need legends here," Major William Kovacs said from the far end of the table, his voice dripping skepticism. "We need operators who can actually—" "Major." Thornhill's voice cut like a blade. "Let me determine what we need." He turned back to the woman. "The brief says you have mountain experience, winter operations, long-range reconnaissance." He paused. "It doesn't say much else." "That's intentional." "I'm sure it is." Thornhill crossed his arms. "But I've got 24 lives on the line and a mission window that's closing fast. I need to know who I'm dealing with." The room went still. "Your call sign?" Thornhill asked. She didn't blink, didn't shift her weight, didn't perform any of the small movements people make when they're about to lie or embellish. "Specter Six." Captain Jennifer Walsh dropped her tablet. The clatter echoed obscenely loud in the sudden silence. Hartford went pale. Kovacs froze mid-reach for his coffee. Even Thornhill, who prided himself on maintaining composure under artillery fire, felt his pulse spike. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. The woman Specter Six stood unchanged, as if she just stated her name was Jane Smith, as if she hadn't just invoked a designation that had become myth, somewhere between classified reports and late-night whiskey stories. Thornhill recovered first. "You're going to need to prove that." "No, I don't." Her voice remained level. "You already believe me, General. Otherwise, you would have thrown me out for the audacity of claiming it." She was right. He did believe her, because nobody would dare use that call sign unless it was true, or they had a death wish. The younger officers looked confused. Captain Derek Fisher, fresh from his second tour, leaned toward Walsh. "What's Specter Six?" Walsh shook her head slowly, her face still ashen. It was Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Porter who finally spoke. Porter had gray in his beard and scars that told stories. He'd been in the game long enough to remember. "Christmas operations," Porter said quietly. "Northern Theater, 7, maybe 8 years back." He looked at the woman. "They said you were dead." "They said a lot of things." Thornhill studied her with new eyes. The stories came flooding back, now pieces of legend he'd half dismissed as combat mythology. The sniper who operated alone in blizzard conditions, the ghost who appeared during winter operations when everything had gone wrong, the woman who'd killed at distances that shouldn't have been possible in driving snow. "The Chechen operation," Thornhill said. Specter Six nodded once. "The embassy extraction." Another nod. The Christmas Day assault on the mountain stronghold where he stopped, where the entire support element was wiped out and you held the line alone for 6 hours. 5 hours and 43 minutes, she corrected, and I didn't hold it alone. There were 4 others, they just didn't make it to the evacuation. The room absorbed this in heavy silence. Kovacs found his voice. Why should we believe you're who you claim to be? Anyone could walk in here and… Operation Frozen Prophet, Specter Six said. December 23rd, 7 years ago. You were a captain then, Major Kovacs, leading a recon team through the Tora Valley. You got pinned down by a machine gun nest on the ridge. You called for fire support, but the weather had grounded all air assets. Kovacs went very still. Someone put 3 rounds through the gunner's position from 1,400 meters out, she continued. In a crosswind that would have blown most shots into the next province. Your team made it out. You wrote in your after-action report that it must have been a lucky mortar round, because no sniper could make that shot in those conditions. How do you… It wasn't luck. And it wasn't a mortar. Kovacs stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. I'll be damned. Thornhill felt the dynamic in the room shift, skepticism transforming into something else. Not quite belief. Belief was too simple a word, more like recognition. The way soldiers recognize the presence of something greater than tactics and training. Why now? Thornhill asked. Why come back after all this time? For the first time, something flickered in Specter Six's eyes. Not quite emotion, more like the shadow of it. Because I owe a debt, she said. And Christmas is when debts come due. The general dismissed everyone except his 3 most senior officers, Hartford, Porter, and Kovacs. When the door closed, Porter immediately poured himself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. I need to know this is real, Thornhill said. Hartford pulled up a file on his laptop. I've been running searches while we talked. Sarah Brennan, former Marine Scout sniper. Multiple deployments. Specialized in winter mountain operations. He paused. Officially listed as KIA 7 years ago. Body never recovered. Sarah Brennan, Thornhill repeated. The name felt strange after hearing the legend. That's not who she is anymore, Porter said. I was in the TOC when she ran her operations. We never used real names on the net. Just the call sign. Specter Six. Why 6? Kovacs asked. Because there were 5 others before her who tried to do what she did. Porter's voice went quiet. They all died in the mountains. She was the 6th, the one who survived. Thornhill pulled up the classified file Hartford had accessed. Sarah Brennan's service record read like a fiction novel. Distinguished marksmanship badges, multiple commendations. Deployment after deployment in winter environments. Then, 7 years ago, the record ended with a single line. KIA, Operation Winter Sanctuary. No remains recovered. What actually happened? Thornhill asked. Porter set down his coffee. We had a team deep in denied territory. Extraction was compromised. The weather turned bad worse than bad. Visibility dropped to nothing. The enemy had them surrounded in a valley with no cover. And someone called in over an encrypted channel, said she could provide overwatch from the high ground. Command approved it because we were desperate. Porter's jaw worked. For 6 hours, she kept an entire enemy force from overrunning that position. They couldn't figure out where the shots were coming from. Every time they tried to advance, their point man dropped. After a while, they stopped trying. The team made it out? Every one of them. But when they sent recovery back for her, Porter trailed off. Nothing. No body. No blood trail. Just spent casings in a hide site that shouldn't have been survivable. And a single message on the net, Specter Six departing. They assume she died during exfil, Hartford added. The mountains, the cold, the enemy patrols. Nobody could have walked out of there alone. But she did, Thornhill said. Apparently. Kovacs leaned back in his chair. So why the disappearance? Why let everyone think she was dead? Because the mission failed. The voice came from the doorway. They all turned. Specter Six stood there, though none of them had heard the door open. You're good at that, Porter muttered. She ignored the comment. The team survived, but the primary objective didn't. She stepped into the room. We were supposed to extract a high-value target, someone who'd been feeding us intelligence for 2 years, someone who had a family. What happened? Thornhill asked, though he suspected he already knew. I held the line so the team could get out, but I couldn't hold it long enough for the target. The enemy overran his position before the helicopter arrived. Her voice remained flat, factual. He knew what would happen. Sent his wife and daughter ahead with the team. Stayed behind to buy them time. And you blame yourself, Porter said. I calculate trajectory, windage, and elevation, Colonel. Blame is irrelevant. But something in her eyes suggested otherwise. What matters is that his family made it out because good people didn't give up on them. Now there are 23 soldiers in those mountains who need the same thing. Thornhill studied her. You think you can get them out? No, sir. I think I can make sure they survive long enough for you to get them out. There's a difference. What do you need? Access to your best intelligence on enemy positions, current weather projections, and a rifle I can trust. Done. Thornhill pulled up the operational maps. But I need something from you first. Sir? A promise that you'll come back this time. His voice softened fractionally. We don't leave people behind, not anymore. Specter Six looked at him for a long moment. Then nodded. Understood, General. But they both knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Captain Fisher found himself assigned to assist with Specter Six's preparation. He still didn't fully understand who she was, but the way the senior officers moved around her suggested something significant. He found her in the armory, field stripping a rifle with practiced efficiency. Captain, she acknowledged, without looking up. Ma'am, he hesitated. I was told to help with whatever you need. Then, be quiet and watch. You might learn something. Fisher bristled but held his tongue. He observed as she inspected every component of the weapon, a precision rifle system designed for extreme range engagement. Her movements were economical, expert. You've never heard the stories, she said. It wasn't a question. No, ma'am. I've only been in theater for... Doesn't matter. She reassembled the bolt carrier group. The stories probably wouldn't be accurate anyway. But they're true? Some of them. She held the rifle up to the light, checking the barrel. The useful ones. Fisher decided to risk the question. What happened that made you legendary? Specter Six lowered the rifle and looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were gray, the color of winter storms. I did my job, Captain. Nothing more. That's not what Colonel Porter says. Porter talks too much. He says you saved his life. Twice. She returned to the rifle. Porter should have kept his head down. Both times. Fisher pulled up a chair. The other officers... They're afraid of you. Not scared, like combat afraid. Something else. Afraid of what I represent. She inserted a magazine, then removed it, checking the feed mechanism. Soldiers don't like being reminded that sometimes the only thing between living and dying is luck and somebody else's skill. Is that what you think? That it was just luck? I think I was trained to shoot in adverse conditions, and I happened to be in the right place when people needed that skill. She set the rifle down. The mythology came later. People turned good shooting into ghost stories because it made them feel better about the randomness of war. But you disappeared. Yes, and they said you were dead. They weren't wrong. The woman who took that call sign doesn't exist anymore. She stood, slinging the rifle. I'm just someone who knows how to work in winter mountains and doesn't mind the cold. Fisher followed her out of the armory. Why did you come back? She stopped at the entrance to the operations building. Snow had started falling again, thick flakes that muffled sound. Because 7 years ago, a man I couldn't save told me something before he died, she said. He said that his daughters would grow up safe because people like me exist. People who show up when everything is broken and make sure the right ones survive. She looked at Fisher. Those soldiers in the mountains deserve someone to show up for them too. And if you don't make it back this time, then the legend dies properly. She walked into the snow. Either way, the story ends. Fisher stood there, watching her disappear into the white. He understood now. The fear wasn't of Specter Six herself. It was the fear of needing her, of being in a situation so desperate that only a ghost could save you. He also understood why the general had looked so grim when she'd spoken her call sign. Because legends only return when everything else has failed. Thornhill found Porter in his quarters, sitting in the dark with a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. I thought you might come by, Porter said, pouring drinks without being asked. Thornhill accepted the glass and sat. Tell me what really happened, not the official report. Porter took a long drink. You read the files. Elite reconnaissance team compromised in the Koryak sector. High-value intelligence asset and his family trapped with them. Weather deteriorating. Enemy closing in. I read that. I want to know about her. Sarah volunteered for Overwatch duty. Said she knew the mountains, knew how to operate in zero visibility conditions. Command was skeptical, but we were out of options. Porter refilled his glass, though he'd barely emptied it. She went in alone. Standard infiltration protocols. No support, no backup. That's insane. That's what I said. But she insisted. Said having a team would just create more targets and make her position easier to spot. Porter's hands tightened around the glass. She established a hide site on a ridge overlooking the valley, 1,500 meters from the primary target location. In conditions that should have made precision shooting impossible. But she made the shots. Not just made them, perfect them. Porter's voice took on a tone of reluctant awe. The enemy tried everything. Suppressive fire, smoke, flanking maneuvers, didn't matter. Every time they exposed themselves, she put them down. Center mass, clean kills, like the weather wasn't even there. Thornhill sipped his bourbon. And the target? Porter's face darkened. The extraction bird arrived 40 minutes late. Weather delay. By then, the enemy had figured out where the team was holed up. They started mortaring the position. The team leader, Lieutenant Cameron Wells, made the call to board the helicopter immediately. They'd take who they could and abort. The asset's family made it? His wife and 2 daughters. Yes. They got loaded first. Porter's voice went hollow. But the asset himself, Dmitry Volkov, he stayed behind with Specter Six. Tried to buy time for the helicopter to get away safely. Christ. The last transmission we got from Specter Six was audio only, static-filled, barely intelligible. She reported that Volkov was hit, critical, that she was engaging multiple hostiles to protect his position. And then nothing. The helicopter made it out under heavy fire. When we reviewed the extraction footage later, we could hear gunshots in the background. Deliberate, precise, but the weather was so bad we couldn't see anything. When did they send recovery? 36 hours later, when the storm broke. They found the hide site. Found shell casings from Volkov's weapon. Found blood, his blood, confirmed by DNA. But no bodies, no Specter Six. Porter drained his glass. Just a single message scratched into the rock of the hide site. They got out, that's what matters. Thornhill sat in silence, processing. So everyone assumed that she died getting Volkov out, or died in the mountains trying to exfiltrate alone, or got captured and executed. Porter poured again, unsteady. Take your pick. None of the options included her walking away. But she did walk away. Apparently. Porter looked up. Marcus, I watched the Overwatch footage 100 times. The shooting she did that day, it wasn't human. I don't mean she was perfect. I mean she was operating beyond what should be physically possible. Compensating for wind that was changing second to second, adjusting for targets moving through blowing snow, making kills at distances where most snipers couldn't even acquire targets. You think she's the real thing? I think she's something that happens once in a generation, if we're lucky. Porter met his eyes, and I think she carries every person she couldn't save like stones in her pack. That's why she disappeared. The weight got too heavy. Thornhill set down his glass. And now, she's back. Yeah. Which means the situation must be bad enough that she thinks she can finally pay off the debt. Porter's voice went quiet. Or bad enough that she's looking for a way to end the story. You think she's suicidal? I think she's practical. And I think she knows exactly what the odds are of getting those soldiers out. Porter stood, moving to the window. Snow fell steady outside. Christmas operations? That's what they called them. Because she only appeared during winter, during the season when everyone else wanted to be home, like she was making up for something. For Volkov, for all of them. Every person she couldn't save, every mission that went wrong despite her best efforts. Porter pressed his hand against the cold glass. The question isn't whether she can do the job, Marcus. It's whether she'll survive it this time. Thornhill joined him at the window. Somewhere out in that white darkness, 23 soldiers waited for salvation, and the only person who might deliver it was a ghost who'd already died once. Get her everything she needs, Thornhill said. and pray that legends can be reborn. The briefing began at 0400 hours. Specter 6 stood before the topographical display, studying the enemy positions with the intensity of someone memorizing scripture. Thornhill laid out the situation in brutal terms. 3 reconnaissance teams pushed too deep into the Koryak range, trying to locate a suspected weapons cache. They got cut off when enemy forces moved in behind them. Now they're trapped in a valley with limited ammunition, no heavy weapons, and a storm system moving in that'll make extraction impossible within 72 hours. He highlighted the valley on the map. They've fortified a position here, an abandoned mining station. Defensible, but not indefinitely. The enemy has them surrounded on 3 sides. The only approach vector for extraction is from the east, through this pass, which the enemy controls, Hartford added. Correct. Thornhill zoomed in. They've established checkpoints here, here, and here. Machine gun nests, mortar positions, approximately 200 combatants, well armed and prepared for a siege. Fisher, who'd been allowed to observe, studied the map with growing dread. What's the plan? The plan is to get those soldiers to the extraction point alive, Thornhill said, which requires clearing this pass long enough for them to move through and board the helicopters. That's suicide. The enemy'll just... Unless they're too busy being killed to stop the movement, Specter 6 said. Everyone turned to her. She traced a line on the map with one finger. Here. This ridge overlooks the entire valley. Elevation advantage of 600 meters. Range to the nearest checkpoint is 1900 meters. To the farthest, 2300. In clear conditions, that's extreme long range, Kovacs said. In a blizzard, the enemy will assume they're safe from observation. They'll be more relaxed, less disciplined. She looked at Thornhill. I'll need to be in position 12 hours before the extraction begins. That means insertion tomorrow night. Alone? Fisher asked. Yes. That's the only way it works, Captain. Her voice remained calm. A team creates noise, thermal signatures, tracks in the snow. One person can ghost in and establish a hide site before they know I'm there. Porter leaned forward. And if they find you before the extraction starts? They won't. But if they do, then the mission proceeds without me, and you find another way to clear the pass. She met his eyes. But they won't find me. Thornhill studied the ridge she'd identified. That's 4 kilometers from the friendly position. You'll have no support, no backup. Once you're in place, you're committed. Understood. And the weather forecast says visibility will be near 0 during the extraction window. I've worked in worse. Have you? Thornhill's voice hardened. Because the meteorology team says this storm will be one of the worst on record. Wind gusts up to 50 knots. Temperature dropping to -30. Snow accumulation measured in feet, not inches. Then the enemy won't expect anyone to be operational in it. Specter 6's expression didn't change, which gives us the advantage. Hartford pulled up weapon specs. Even with our best cold weather ammunition and the most advanced optics, making precision shots at that range in those conditions, the margin of error is enormous. Then I'll have to not make errors. The confidence in her voice wasn't arrogance. It was simply statement of fact, delivered with the same tone someone might use to say the sky is blue. What do you need from us? Thornhill asked. 3 things. She counted them off. First, complete intelligence workup on enemy patrol patterns, shift changes, and command structure. I need to know when their officers are most likely to be visible. Done. Second, thermal imaging updates every 6 hours once I'm in position. The enemy will try to move reinforcements when the extraction begins. I need to know where they're coming from. We can provide that. Third, she paused. When the extraction bird lands, I need you to get those soldiers loaded and gone in under 90 seconds, because once I start shooting, the enemy will triangulate my position. After that, I'll have maybe 2 minutes before they rain hell on that ridge. The room went silent. And your exfil plan? Thornhill asked quietly. I'll make my way to the secondary extraction point here. She indicated a location 8 kilometers north. Estimated time to reach it, 4 hours after the primary extraction completes. That's a long time to evade 200 hostiles who'll be hunting you. Yes, sir, it is. Fisher couldn't stay quiet. This is insane. You're planning to shoot your way through an entire enemy force, then walk out through a blizzard while they chase you? Specter Six looked at him with those winter gray eyes. "No, Captain. I'm planning to kill enough of them that the survivors are too busy reorganizing to effectively pursue. There's a difference. The survival rate for this mission is..." "Irrelevant," she interrupted. "The survival rate for those 23 soldiers without intervention is 0. My odds don't matter." Thornhill made a decision. "You have authorization. Hartford, get her everything she needs. Porter, coordinate with the extraction teams. Kovacs, I want fallback plans A through C ready if this goes wrong." The officers stood to leave. Thornhill stopped Specter Six with a hand on her arm. "Sarah," he said, using her real name for the first time, "you don't have to do this. We can find another way." "No, sir, you can't." Her voice softened fractionally. "That's why you brought me in, because the regular ways already failed." "Then at least tell me you'll try to make it back." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I'll try, General. But Christmas doesn't always deliver happy endings." She left before he could respond. Porter appeared at Thornhill's shoulder. "She's not planning to come back." "I know. Are we going to stop her?" Thornhill watched her walk away through the falling snow. "No, because she's right. Those soldiers deserve someone willing to show up for them, even if it costs everything." Even if it costs her? Especially if it costs her. That's what makes her Specter Six. Midnight. The armory stood empty except for Specter Six and the methodical sounds of preparation. She laid out her equipment with surgical precision. Rifle, ammunition, scope, survival gear, communications equipment. Each item received individual attention. Each component inspected, tested, confirmed. No music played. No Christmas carols drifted through the walls. Just the wind outside and the quiet click of metal on metal. Fisher found her there, though he'd been specifically told not to disturb her. "Captain," she said without looking up, "you were ordered to stay away." I wanted to understand. "Understand what?" "Why you're doing this." He stepped closer. "Porter told me about Volkov, about what happened. You blame yourself." "Blame is a luxury." She continued packing magazines. "I calculate outcomes and probabilities." "That's bullshit." Fisher's voice rose. "You're planning to die out there because you think you owe something to a man who's been dead for 7 years. Finally, she stopped, turned to face him. "Lieutenant Volkov had 2 daughters," she said, "Elena and Natasha, 7 and 9 years old when he died. They got out because their father stayed behind, because I held the line long enough for them to board that helicopter." She picked up a photograph from her pack, worn, creased from being carried. 2 young girls with dark hair, smiling at a camera. "This was in Volkov's pocket when he died. He gave it to me in those final minutes. Said, someone needs to remember what this cost." Her fingers traced the edges. 23 soldiers in those mountains have families too. Children who deserve to have their parents come home. "So you're going to throw your life away?" "I'm going to do my job." She tucked the photo away. "If that costs my life, then it costs my life. But those soldiers will get out." Fisher struggled for words. "The general told you to come back." "The general told me to try. And I will try. But there are no guarantees in Winter Mountains, Captain. You learn that fast or you die." "Then why go at all? Why not just..." "Because 7 years ago, I failed." Her voice went flat. "I was good enough to save most of them, but not all of them. And that failure has followed me every day since." "So this is redemption?" "This is payment." "There's a difference." She returned to her preparations. Fisher watched her work, seeing now the weight she carried. Not just equipment, not just weapons, but the names and faces of everyone she'd been unable to save. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "Make sure the extraction team is ready. Make sure they understand timing is critical. And if I don't make it to the secondary extraction point..." She paused. "Tell the general thank you for giving me one last chance to get it right." Fisher nodded, not trusting his voice. He left her there in the empty armory, surrounded by instruments of precision death, preparing to walk into a storm that might never let her out. 3 hours before dawn, she finished her preparations. The rifle gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The scope calibrated to compensate it for altitude and temperature. Ammunition selected and inspected rounds designed for extreme cold weather performance. She dressed in white winter camouflage, layer after layer, until she became just another part of the snow. No identifying markers, No insignia, nothing that would distinguish her from the landscape except skill and purpose. At 0400, she stood at the departure point. Thornhill waited there, along with Porter and Hartford. "Final intelligence update," Hartford said, handing her a tablet. "Enemy pattern analysis, most recent satellite imagery, predicted weather track." She studied it, memorizing, then handed it back. "Radio check every 6 hours," Porter said. "Silent protocol, 1 click for affirmative, 2 for negative." She nodded. Thornhill stepped forward. "There's still time to—" "No, sir, there isn't." She shouldered her pack. "Those soldiers have been waiting long enough." She walked into the darkness before any of them could respond. Within seconds, the snow swallowed her completely. Porter stood watching the empty white. "Think we'll see her again?" "I don't know," Thornhill admitted. "But I know this. If those soldiers make it out, it'll be because someone cared enough to become a ghost for them." Behind them, the base prepared for Christmas. Decorations went up, carols played softly. Soldiers wrote letters home, hoping they'd arrive in time for the holiday. And somewhere in the mountains, a legend moved through the snow toward a debt that could only be paid in blood. 18 hours later. Ridge position. Specter 6 lay absolutely still in her hide site, buried under a thermal camouflage tarp and 6 inches of accumulated snow. Only the rifle's muzzle and her scope protruded from the white blanket. Through the scope, the valley sprawled below a tactical nightmare made visible. Enemy positions dotted the terrain like wounds on pale skin, machine gun nests, mortar pits, checkpoint bunkers, and beyond them, barely visible through the falling snow, the mining station where 23 Americans waited for salvation. Her radio clicked once, command signaling the extraction was beginning. She adjusted her breathing, slowed her heart rate, became part of the mountain. Through the scope, she watched the enemy checkpoint nearest the extraction corridor. 4 soldiers clustered around a heater, rifles slung casually. They didn't expect trouble in weather like this. Wind velocity, 32 knots, gusting to 40. Temperature, -28. Visibility, 200 meters. She calculated trajectory compensation. Windage, Coriolis effect at this latitude, the way cold air would affect bullet ballistics. Range to target, 1912 meters. She exhaled slowly, completely, held empty, and pressed the trigger. The rifle's report was muffled by distance and snow. By the time the sound reached the valley floor, it was just another wind gust. Through the scope, she watched the furthest enemy soldier drop cleanly. Headshot. He collapsed without a sound. The other 3 looked confused, stared at their fallen comrade, didn't understand yet that death had arrived. She worked the bolt, chambered the next round. Target 2, adjusting for the slight wind shift. Squeeze. Another drop, this one in mid-sentence to his companions. Now they understood. They scattered, diving for cover. Too late. Target 3 attempted to reach the bunker. She put a round through his center mass as he ran. Target 4 tried returning fire, shooting blindly into the storm. She took extra care with this one, waited for him to expose himself fully while adjusting his position. 1 shot, clean kill. Checkpoint Alpha was silent. She radioed command, single click, position cleared. Through her scope, she watched the American soldiers begin their movement. Small figures in white camouflage, moving fast and low through the snow. They had maybe 8 minutes before the enemy realized what was happening. She shifted targets to checkpoint Bravo. This position was more alert, probably heard the gunfire from Alpha despite the distance. 6 soldiers, weapons ready, scanning the approaches. This would be harder. She identified the officer, distinguished by his position and the way others deferred to him. Priority target. Range, 2,100 meters. Wind speed increasing. She waited for the gust to pass. Exhaled, fired. The officer went down. Instant confusion among the remaining 5 soldiers. She worked through them methodically. 1, 2, 3. Each shot calculated. Each death precise. The 4th soldier managed to get a radio call out before her bullet found him. She heard the chatter spike on her intercepted enemy frequency. They knew something was wrong now. They just didn't know what. The 5th soldier tried to retreat. She tracked his movement through the scope, led him fractionally, and fired. He fell mid-stride. The 6th had time to look around to search for where death was coming from. His eyes turned toward the ridges. She put a round directly between those eyes from 2,100 meters in a crosswind that would have defeated most Olympic marksmen. Checkpoint Bravo eliminated. The American soldiers were halfway to the extraction point now. She could see enemy forces beginning to react, figures moving toward the valley, trying to cut off the escape route. She shifted her focus to these reinforcements. Target-rich environment. Multiple hostiles moving in formation. She started at the back of the column and worked forward. Leadership first, then the heavy weapons operators, then anyone who looked competent. The snow intensified, making visibility worse. She adjusted her technique, firing at the moment when wind-driven gaps appeared in the white curtain. 5 kills. 7. 10. The enemy formation collapsed into chaos. They didn't know where the fire was coming from, didn't understand how someone could shoot with precision in these conditions. Some tried to advance anyway. She killed them. Some tried to find cover. She killed them there too. Some tried to organize a coherent defense. She killed their leaders and watched the organization dissolve. Through it all, the American soldiers moved closer to extraction. She could hear the helicopter rotors now, fighting against the wind to reach the landing zone. A new enemy column appeared from the east, reinforcements she hadn't accounted for, 50 or 60 soldiers, moving fast. She shifted her entire body, adjusting angle. These targets were at the extreme edge of her capability range. 2,300 meters, maybe more. Wind reading was approximation now. Bullet drop would be severe. Probability of first shot hit, low. She fired anyway. The lead soldier dropped. She couldn't tell if it was center mass or a fluke hit. Didn't matter. She fired again. And again, working the bolt action as fast as accuracy allowed. Not every shot connected, but enough did. Enough to slow the column. Enough to make them seek cover instead of advancing. Enough to buy time. The helicopter touched down. Through her scope, she watched American soldiers boarding in organized chaos. Fast. Efficient. 45 seconds. 60 seconds. The helicopter lifted off. Rotors screaming. Snow swirling around it like a protective shroud. She radioed command. 2 clicks. Extraction successful. Then the world turned to fire. The enemy had triangulated her position. Mortar rounds began impacting the ridge, not accurate yet, but getting closer with each salvo. She'd known this was coming, had planned for it. Time to move. She abandoned the hide site, leaving everything except her rifle and basic survival gear. Speed mattered now, not comfort. The first shell landed 50 meters short. The second closer. She moved along the ridge, using the terrain for cover. Behind her, the hide site disappeared in an explosion of rock and snow. More shells incoming. The enemy was dumping everything they had onto that ridge, trying to kill the ghost who'd slaughtered their forces. She dropped over the ridge line and into dead ground. Below their observation, the shelling continued, but the rounds were impacting where she'd been, not where she was. 8 kilometers to the secondary extraction point. 4 hours through enemy territory in a blizzard. She started walking. Behind her, the valley echoed with gunfire and explosions, the enemy's rage at being defeated by something they couldn't see or stop. Ahead, only white silence and the long road home. 2 hours into her exfiltration, Specter 6 felt the wound. It must have happened during the mortar barrage shrapnel or debris. She couldn't tell. Somewhere in the chaos of abandoning the hide site and getting clear of the killing zone, the adrenaline had masked it initially. Now, with each step through the snow, her left side burned. She pressed her hand against the tactical vest. Came away red. Not catastrophic, but not good either. The cold would help slow the bleeding, but movement would keep it open. And 4 hours of movement through mountain terrain. She kept walking. The storm intensified. If that was possible. Visibility dropped to arm's length. The wind carried snow horizontal, stinging any exposed skin. Temperature falling toward -30. Good. The weather would cover her tracks. Make pursuit difficult. Even thermal imaging would be degraded in these conditions. Bad. Because she was alone, wounded, and exhaustion was starting to set in. Her radio clicked. 6-hour check-in. She clicked back once. Affirmative. I'm alive. They had no way of knowing she was hit. No way of knowing each step was becoming harder. That's how she wanted it, because if they knew, they'd risk people trying to extract her early, and she wouldn't let more lives be endangered because of her choices. The wound throbbed in rhythm with her pulse. She ignored it. Pain was just information, and this information was telling her something she already knew. She'd been hurt before and survived. She'd survive this too, maybe. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Volkov's face in those final minutes, blood spreading across his chest, him trying to smile despite everything. "Thank you for trying," he'd said. "I should have been faster," she'd replied. "No, you did everything right. Everything." His grip on her hand had weakened. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise you won't carry this. Promise you'll remember that you saved my family. That's enough. That has to be enough." She'd promised. Had tried to keep that promise, but some weights can't be set down just by wishing them away. 3 hours in, the secondary extraction point was still 2 kilometers distant. Her pace had slowed despite her best efforts. The blood loss was adding up. She heard voices through the storm, enemy patrol. She dropped prone, ignoring the spike of pain from the wound, lay perfectly still as figures materialized through the white 4 soldiers, searching the ridgeline systematically. They passed within 10 meters. Didn't see her. She waited until their voices faded completely before moving again. Her hands were numb now, even inside the gloves. Standard cold weather exposure. She'd felt worse. 4 hours. She crested the final ridge and saw the extraction point below, a small clearing barely large enough for a helicopter. Empty. Silent. She keyed her radio. Clicked twice in rapid succession. At position. The response came immediately. 1 click. Acknowledged. Now the waiting. The helicopter would come when the weather allowed. Could be 10 minutes. Could be an hour. Could be never, if the storm worsened. She found a position with good visibility and settled in, pressing cloth against the wound. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. Her body temperature was dropping. Signs of hypothermia starting to manifest. She thought about the soldiers she'd saved. 23 people who would wake up tomorrow alive. 23 families who would get their people back. Volkov's daughters. Wherever they were now grown women, probably they'd never know that their father's death had saved them. Never know that a stranger had carried their photograph for 7 years as reminder of the cost. Maybe that was better. Thunder in the distance. No, not thunder. Rotor blades. The helicopter appeared through the storm like an apparition. It circled once, then dropped into the clearing. Snow erupted in blinding waves from the rotor wash. She stood, ignoring the protest from her body, walked toward the bird. A crew chief jumped out, reached for her, saw the blood. "I'm fine," she shouted over the noise. "You're hit. I'm mobile. Let's go." They loaded her. The helicopter lifted immediately, clawing for altitude. Below, the mountains receded into white darkness. She looked back once, at the ridge where she'd made her stand, at the valley where 23 soldiers had been saved, at the ghost she was leaving behind. The crew chief was talking to her. Something about the wound, about getting her to medical. She nodded, not really hearing. Exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She'd held it off through pure will for hours. Now, with the mission complete, there was no reason to fight anymore. Her eyes closed. She woke to bright lights and concerned faces. A field hospital. Someone was working on her side, doctor probably. She couldn't focus enough to tell. "You're damn lucky," a voice said. "General Thornhill. 2 inches to the right and that shrapnel would have killed you." "Lucky," she repeated. The word felt foreign. "The soldiers you saved want to thank you." "No." "Sarah." "No thanks. No ceremony. No recognition." She tried to sit up. Failed. "That's not why I came back." "Then why did you?" Thornhill's voice softened. "Really?" She thought about that. About Volkov's daughters. About 7 years of carrying weight that couldn't be measured in pounds. "Because legends don't get to retire, General. They just get forgotten." She managed to meet his eyes. "I wanted to be forgotten as something more than a ghost story." "You're more than that. You always were." "Maybe." Her eyes drifted closed again. "Or maybe I'm just someone who knows how to shoot in bad weather, and got lucky one more time." But they both knew that wasn't true. The war room was different when she walked in 3 days later. Not physically, same maps, same screens, same harsh lighting, but the atmosphere had changed. The officers stood when she entered. Not parade ground formal, just stood. Recognition of something beyond rank. Thornhill gestured to a chair. Sit. Doctor said you shouldn't be walking yet. Doctor doesn't know me very well. But she sat anyway. The wound still hurt, but pain was familiar, manageable. I called this meeting for one reason, Thornhill said. To say what needs to be said on behalf of everyone who was part of this operation. General? That's not. Be quiet and listen, Sarah. She went still. 23 soldiers came home alive because of what you did. 23 families will have someone at their Christmas table who wouldn't have been there otherwise. Thornhill's voice carried weight. The mission report credits you with 43 confirmed kills under conditions that military doctrine says make precision shooting impossible. You held a defensive position single-handedly for 6 hours. You extracted under fire while wounded. And you did all of it without asking for recognition or reward. He picked up something from the desk. A folder. I've read your full-service jacket now. The real one, not the sanitized version. Operation Frozen Prophet. The Chechen extraction. The embassy siege. Christmas Day at the mountain stronghold. He set the folder down. You've saved over 200 lives in your career. And the world doesn't know your name. That's how it should be. Maybe, but that doesn't mean those of us in this room can't acknowledge what we know. He glanced at the other officers. We're not giving you a medal, not writing this up for public recognition. That's not what you want. Thank you, but we are doing one thing. Thornhill pulled a small metal object from his pocket. A challenge coin, the kind units create to honor exceptional service. This one was unmarked except for 2 words engraved in simple text. Specter 6. Every person involved in this operation is getting one of these. Everyone who supported the mission, everyone who waited while you were out there. He placed it on the table between them. Not a decoration, not an official commendation. Just a reminder that some things don't need formal recognition to matter. She picked up the coin, turned it over in her fingers. Simple, clean, anonymous. Perfect. The soldiers you saved, Porter said, speaking for the first time. They wanted to meet you, to say thank you. I know. I said no. Why? She thought about how to explain. How to make them understand that gratitude, while well-meaning, wasn't what she needed. Because if they meet me, I become real, she said finally. I become a person they have to think about. Someone they might worry about or feel obligated to. That's a burden they don't need. They want to carry that burden. I know. But I don't want them to. She set the coin down. What they need is to go home and hug their families and live their lives. Not spend time thinking about the stranger who showed up in a snowstorm. Hartford leaned forward. Is that why you disappeared before, after Volkov? Partially. She paused, deciding how much to share. After that operation, I realized something. The people I saved, they tried to find me, tried to thank me. And every time someone reached out, every time someone wanted to express gratitude, she trailed off. It made the ones you couldn't save hurt more, Thornhill finished. Yes. The admission felt heavy. Every thank you reminded me of the ones who didn't get saved. Every grateful message was a contrast to the silence from families who'd lost someone while I was supposed to be protecting them. The room absorbed this in silence. So you ghosted, Kovacs said. Walked away from everything. I became what I'd always been, a tool, a capability, not a person with a name and history. She looked around at each of them. It was easier that way. Was it? Fisher asked quietly. Or did it just let you avoid dealing with the weight you were carrying? She didn't answer. Thornhill stood. Well, you're here now. And whether you like it or not, we know who you are, know what you've done, and we're grateful not just for this mission, but for all of them. He walked to the front of the room and did something unexpected. He removed his cover, the peaked hat that signified his rank and authority, set it on the table. One by one, the other officers followed suit. Porter, Hartford, Kovacs, even young Fisher, who barely understood the symbolism but recognized the gravity. A moment of silence, of acknowledgement for sacrifice that couldn't be fully expressed in words. Then Thornhill spoke. Welcome back, Specter 6. She stood, not trusting her voice to remain steady. Picked up the challenge coin. Thank you, General. The extraction birds fueled and ready when you want to leave. He put his cover back on, but you have authorization to stay as long as you need. Rest, recover, or just exist somewhere warm for a while. I appreciate that. But I think it's time to move on. Back to the shadows? She smiled slightly. Something like that. She left the war room for the last time. Behind her, the officers returned to their work planning operations, managing personnel, fighting the endless war. But they did so knowing that somewhere in the world, when everything went wrong and the situation seemed impossible, there was still someone who might show up, someone who moved through winter storms like a ghost, someone who cared more about the mission than about being remembered. Some legends return only once. But once is sometimes enough. Christmas Eve arrived, with clear skies and bitter cold. The storm had finally broken, leaving the landscape pristine and hostile. Specter Six stood at the edge of the airfield, pack secured, rifle case in hand. The transport that would take her away from forward operating base Sentinel idled nearby. She'd said her goodbyes, brief, professional farewells to the few people she'd allowed herself to connect with. Now only the departure remained. "You never told me where you go," Fisher said, appearing beside her. "When you disappear." "No, I didn't." "Are you going to?" "No." He laughed. "Fair enough." He hesitated, then asked the question he'd been holding. Was it worth it, coming back? She considered this. Volkov's daughters are 21 and 23 now. They have lives, careers, families starting. They exist because their father bought them time, and because a helicopter extracted them from hell. That's not what I asked. I know. She looked at the mountains in the distance. But it's the only answer I have. Worth is measured in whether the people who should have survived did survive. By that metric, yes, it was worth it, even though you almost died, especially because of that. The only way the math works, the only way any of this works, is if some people are willing to pay more than others, to stand in places others can't, to do things others won't. She picked up her pack. The soldiers I saved, they'll go home. They'll celebrate Christmas with their families. Maybe they'll think about what happened, maybe they won't. Either way, they're alive. That's what matters. And you? I'll be somewhere else when the next impossible situation develops. When someone needs an edge that conventional forces can't provide. She started toward the transport. That's what ghosts do, Captain. We haunt the places where regular people can't survive. You're not a ghost. She stopped, turned back. What am I then? Fisher thought about it. You're someone who carries weight for others so they don't have to. Someone who shows up when showing up is the bravest thing possible. He smiled. You're what we all wish we could be. No, Captain. I'm what I need to be because I wasn't good enough to save everyone. Her voice went soft. There's a difference. She boarded the transport without looking back. The door closed. The engines spooled up. Fisher watched it take off, carrying the legend back into obscurity. Beside him, Porter appeared. "Think we'll see her again?" Fisher asked. "Maybe. If the situation gets bad enough." Porter's breath steamed in the cold air. "But I hope we don't. Because if Specter 6 shows up, it means everything else has already failed." They stood in silence, watching the transport disappear into the bright winter sky. In the barracks, 23 soldiers celebrated Christmas, laughed, shared stories, made video calls home. None of them knew the woman's real name. Most had never seen her face, but they all knew they'd been saved by something that shouldn't have been possible. By someone who cared more about their survival than about being thanked. In the war room, Thornhill reviewed after-action reports. The mission was classified. The details would be buried in files that few people would ever read. Official histories would credit coalition forces with the successful extraction. Specter 6 would remain a footnote. A rumor. A legend whispered in ready rooms and passed between generations of operators. That's how she wanted it. In the transport, heading south, Sarah Brennan looked at Volkov's photograph one last time. Then she tucked it away in a pocket over her heart. The debt was paid. Not erased. Debts like that never fully disappear. But acknowledged, addressed, given its due weight. 23 more families would be whole this Christmas. 23 more lives preserved against impossible odds. It wasn't redemption. Redemption was too grand a word for what amounted to mathematics. The calculus of sacrifice and survival. the brutal accounting of who lives and who dies. But it was something. Maybe, for once, it was enough. The transport flew on through the winter sky. Below, the mountains gradually gave way to foothills, then valleys, then the flat expanse of civilization. Somewhere down there, people celebrated Christmas, exchanged gifts, sang carols, lived lives untouched by the knowledge of how close things could come to falling apart. That was good. That's how it should be. Because legends only need to exist in the spaces between safety and chaos. In the moments when everything balances on a knife's edge and someone needs to be there to keep it from falling. Sarah Brennan had been that someone. Had stood in that space, had paid the price and carried the weight and done what needed doing. Now she was leaving again, returning to the shadows, becoming the ghost that haunts winter storms and impossible missions. Some legends return only once, but once is sometimes enough. And Christmas, despite everything, still delivers its miracles. Just not always the ones you expect.